Good morning. Still morning, right? All right. Thank you all so much for being here. It's so great to see everybody back at Ignite. A lot to talk about. It's my privilege every year at Ignite to represent the entire Palo Alto Networks product team and all of the just really cool and innovative things that we do. Things we just recently came out with, but also to be the first to share with you a number of things that nobody here has seen before as well. Now, to do that this year, I'm going to cover quite a bit, but I've actually asked a couple of folks from my team to join me as well a little bit later on, so you can hear from some of the experts directly as well, which is going to be really exciting. Now, Mark talked a bit about digital transformation, and for some reason, whenever I think about digital transformation, I think I get a little bit nostalgic for some reason. I'm not quite sure why, and I start thinking back to, when I first joined the workforce out of college a couple years ago. Few years ago? All right, several years ago. Not actually quite that long ago. But I do remember this. I remember showing up to work and being handed a desktop computer. And you know what's ironic about that? I worked for a company that made laptops. They were too expensive to give to the employees, though. I also remember these guys. You know what's funny? I interviewed there for a junior product management position. They turned me down. They really did. They asked me, what's the one thing you would change about it? And I said, I'd add a color display myself. They're like, nah, no one's going to need that. One of us is still here. So that's right. State-of-the-art disaster recovery, always a fun thing to think about. Obviously, they're still around. Very successful company. That's not why they're on the slide. I remember when people used to say, so what's an example of a SaaS company? And you go, Salesforce.com. Oh, yeah. Any others? I don't know, but that's one really good one, right? And now, of course, there's hundreds, thousands all over the place. And then Renee reminded me, this is what 2 terabytes of storage used to look like. Can you believe that? Right, so anyway, this is some of the things I think of when I think about digital transformation. You might say, but that's not digital transformation, and you're right. But I think about these things because when you think about the world we live in today and just how far we've come, and it's not that long of a time, right? The laptops and mobile devices and smartphones, the amount of things that we can do on these devices, and SaaS applications, cloud-delivered applications, cloud-deployed applications, automation, all of the just awesome things that digital transformation has brought us, that when we look at those pictures from not that long ago, we all laugh because we think that was forever ago, right? But it wasn't that long ago. But I bring this up because, as Mark said, digital transformation requires security transformation. And this doesn't just mean new products or new technology. It means a completely different approach to security and how we do this. Now, when we think about this, I'll go back to a picture I used last year at Ignite. The security outcome still really matters. And ultimately, what we're trying to do is prevent successful cyber attacks. And to do that requires visibility, complete visibility, the ability to reduce the attack surface, wherever that surface might be, the ability to prevent everything that we already know is bad, and ideally, we as everybody in this room, every security company, every organization around the world, ideally everything that we already know is bad can be prevented, which leaves us with net new, which ideally we can detect, and then using software and automation, be able to turn that detection to prevention as well. So that's how we need to approach it. Now, the challenge with this from a traditional viewpoint is that there's a lot of capabilities required to do this really well. Each one of these capabilities traditionally has been delivered in the form of net new point products. That's the approach we need to fix. Now, along the way, we need to think about this differently. We actually need to think about leveraging some of the core concepts of digital transformation in our approach to security transformation. We need to think about the power of data and analytics. We need to think about how we can automate more and more and more of what we do. And we need to think about how we can change the consumption model to be much, much, much more oriented around cloud-delivered and cloud-consumed services and less about deploying net new infrastructure all the time. And so it's with that viewpoint that we come to this framework where at the network level, the endpoint level, the cloud, these enforcement points become places where security has to happen. And so because of that, we absolutely need really great infrastructure components in these places. But more and more of the intelligence behind what these products do are going to be consumed as cloud services. They're going to be natively integrated and automated into these locations, okay? We're going to come back to this picture. We're going to expand it as we go throughout the presentation this morning. But keep this in mind in terms of the approach that we're trying to take. How do we be really good at the places where security actually has to happen, and how do we consume more and more of the intelligence and services and analytics from the cloud? When we think about this, one of the key aspects is this notion of locations. This notion that security has to be performed consistently everywhere, all right? Now, if we want to long for the good old days, this is what all locations used to mean. It used to be very contained. It was nice. You could wrap your arms around it, you knew where it was, you knew where your users were, you knew where your applications were. But as we all know, that doesn't exist anymore. The old perimeter is dead. Long live the new perimeter. The perimeter is everywhere. As more and more applications are deployed or consumed from the cloud, as users spend more and more time working from anywhere that they want to, from any device that they want to. But what's interesting about this is when we think about that starting point, it hasn't gone away. In fact, everything is increasing even in that starting point. The use of encryption is increasing. The number of attacks are increasing. The amount of throughput is increasing. So it hasn't been replaced, it's been augmented, all right? So when we think about this, it shows just how important it is that we continue to drive innovation. And it's with that context in mind that we developed and delivered PanOS 8.1 just a few months ago. Over 60 new features, not slowing down the pace of innovation whatsoever, understanding just how important these locations are from a security perspective. With a lot of different amazing new capabilities in this release. Some that I'm particularly fond of are oriented around how we make it easier and easier to adopt the security capabilities of our next-gen firewalls. Changing the way content updates work, change the way security policies are designed and used and understood. As well as providing a lot more visibility and granularity in how we understand and control SaaS applications. You know, HTTP header insertion, for those of you who understand what I'm talking about, in order to be able to understand and control the difference between personal or unsanctioned SaaS applications from business SaaS applications. And something that I think every single release of PanOS since about PanOS 2.1 has enhanced is SSL decryption. Because we understood even when SSL was 5 or 10% of your traffic, let alone the 70 to 80% that it often is today, just how important this was from a security perspective. In this latest release, we added the ability to do what we call SSL decryption broker, to decrypt, provide all the security capabilities we have, but then service chain other capabilities and tools into that decrypted flow before re-encrypting onto the destination to make sure that you can do everything you need to on that traffic. Now, to drive these and many other of the innovations, we revamped the hardware product line over the last few years. We introduced the 7000 series chassis, the 5200 series, 3200, the 800, the 220, the ruggedized 220, to make sure we had the right power to drive all of these new capabilities and throughput requirements and locations where security has to happen. Now, we want to be careful of something. We want to be careful about giving you a race car and then sending you out on LA freeway traffic, right? That doesn't make any sense, right? If you have a race car, you want to use the race car. And so one of the things that's very near and dear to me is a lot of the work we've been putting into how we enable and help you utilize as much of this functionality as possible. Through the security lifecycle review that enables you to speak to the business owners about what's actually happening in your infrastructure. To the expedition migration tool, which started off primarily as a way to migrate legacy configs to Palo Alto Networks, and now is much more about how to take those traditional configurations and get the full use out of them with App ID, User ID, and content inspection, things like that. And most recently, the work done to build a best practice assessment tool. So for those of you who don't know, we have a perspective on what the security best practices actually are. And this tool is designed to take your configurations and actually analyze them relative to those best practices and see where you might have gaps. Expose those gaps to you and show you what you would need to do if you wanted to bridge those gaps and get in compliance with the best practice, and then track that over time so you can see where you're at. Let me show you a little bit what this tool looks like. So it starts off at a relatively simple level, which is just, are you using the functionality? And you'll see this as it scrolls down. There's some cases where, in this sample config, they are, but in many other cases, they're not. Now, this goes into more detail, and I'm not asking you to take all that in, but it goes into a lot of detail about what exactly that means to use that functionality and where you're using that functionality across the entire infrastructure, across multiple devices, security zones, et cetera. But even more importantly, to be able to drill in and say, it's not just about whether or not you are using it, it's about how you're using it, right? So it's one thing, for example, to say, I'm using Wildfire. But as you see in this particular config, it's set to alert mode. That's not the best practices. That might be okay in an eval, but that's not how you should deploy in your production environment. So while the usage is there, it's not being used correctly, or it's not being used in concordance with the best practice. And so that's what this tool allows you to do. It highlights exactly where you would need to go, what you would need to change in order to get into compliance. And then it tracks over time. With this as a starting point, as you focus on this and make progress, it gets better. And even better, we've now run this tool for over 3,000 customers. And so we can also tell you where you're at relative to your industry peers. Now, if your industry peers aren't doing great, I still want you to exceed them. But it is interesting sometimes to take a look and say, where am I at relative to my peers? And then you should try to make them look bad. No, but this is just a really amazing tool. It's something that across Palo Alto Networks, we're putting a lot of time and energy into this notion of security best practices in order to help you get the most out of the products and services you consume from us. We believe this is really important, and we're going to keep building tools and helping you with this adoption cycle. Okay? This is available through any of the Palo Alto Networks sales teams. This is also available through all of our partners. You just have to ask them, and they can engage with you and help you through this process. All right. So I want to come back to this notion of locations and expand it now. So we talk about network security, but now let's talk about what happens from a security perspective when we extend that into cloud applications as well as users anywhere. And for that, I'm going to ask one of the experts on my team, Adam Geller, to come join me on stage. Adam?
Thanks a lot. So somehow I missed the memo that says, don't dress like your boss. I did know enough to keep my sidebar shorter, though, so you'll be able to distinguish between the two of us. So I've got 3 cloud topics to cover. I've got 2 video demos to walk through, and a clock that's already ticking down. So I'm going to get right into this. I'm going to start with a quick update on how Global Protect and Global Protect Cloud Service are helping secure branch and mobile users. So around 7 years ago, when we first launched Global Protect, we launched it as a way to better secure an increasingly mobile workforce. And that migration of users continues today, right? With even more users who are outside of corporate headquarters, whether they are at branch locations or they are working from home, telecommuting, or out at conferences like this. But everybody's working everywhere. And additionally, the applications are following the users off the network as well. And they're either moving out to public cloud or they're being replaced wholesale by SaaS applications. And there are a number of reasons for this, but one of the big ones is that there's just a belief that there's a better experience if the applications are going to be closer to the user. So as a result, you have this scenario where the users are further away from the corporate headquarters, and the corporate headquarters is going to be further away from the applications that the users are trying to get to. So from a security perspective, while backhauling may provide the most robust security opportunity because you can leverage the stack that's already at headquarters, it's generally a pretty inefficient model, and it's going to wind up with a poor overall user experience. So this often leads to an even worse alternative, which is forget security at all, make user experience the top priority, and just have users go directly to those applications on the internet without any security in the mix at all. Now, when we launched Global Protect and Global Protect Cloud Service, Global Protect about 7 years ago, at this point today, we have over 7,000 users who are on the Global Protect subscription. And as you know from last year at Ignite, we announced a new consumption model for Global Protect, which is the Global Protect Cloud Service. And we've been live with it since September of last year. And we already have significant traction with a number of large customers and deployments, both for users and for mobile branches. And both Global Protect and the Global Protect Cloud Service were designed to provide consistent security across all traffic and locations, designed to do it for all users and locations, and really do it in a way that is fully connected and bidirectional in terms of how the components tie together. And I'll show you a little more about that in a couple of minutes. And now specifically for Global Protect Cloud Service, there are a number of operational benefits that make it very attractive to organizations that have very large dynamic workforces, like a consulting practice, or organizations with very distributed models, like branch models like retail or financial services. And so I want to drill into a few examples of how those operational benefits play out in action. So let's go back to that scenario of the backhauling, where all the users and all the branch locations are going to connect back to a central location, and they're going to do that for the purposes of getting secure internet access. So when we introduce Global Protect Cloud Service, we're provisioning, deploying, and maintaining appropriate cloud capacity on behalf of our customers. And this is important. It's not just about providing secure internet access for those users. So it's a little hard to draw it in this picture, so we didn't put all the arrows in. But this is a fully meshed design. So the branches can reach back to corporate, the branches can communicate with each other, the users can get back to corporate, and both users and branches can go out to the internet securely. So it truly is a fully interconnected design for the Global Protect Cloud Service. And so with Global Protect Cloud Service, you have users and branches that are going to connect to geographically preferred gateways, and you're going to avoid all the inefficiencies of that backhauling design. And so when events happen that bring large numbers of users to single locations or a single region, so you can take Ignite as an example, where we have hundreds of Palo Alto Networks employees from around the world, all descending on Southern California, the Global Protect Cloud Service is going to automatically detect this and scale out regional capacity to support that new user population in that area. And it's going to do it without any intervention from the users, any intervention from administrators, right? So completely automated scale out, and of course, scale back after the event is done. So the other operational benefit around Global Protect Cloud Service that I wanted to highlight is the focus around consistency of management across all locations. This is a foundational design principle for Panorama. to be able to manage physical and virtual firewalls wherever they may be deployed. And so we leverage the same capability with Global Protect Cloud Service because we can manage the same estate on-prem or in the cloud. We can also manage the Global Protect Cloud Service infrastructure that's protecting the remote users and the mobile network, the remote networks and mobile users with that same Panorama instance. Right? So this creates an environment for simplified management where you can use shared policies, common objects, templates, all to create consistent security regardless of where the users and infrastructure is living. One other point about this, too, is that the logs from Global Protect Cloud Service are natively put into the logging service. Right? So this means that they are easily available for analysis purposes from Panorama, and that's true whether or not the existing estate has its logs going into the logging service or stored locally in a Panorama. And it also means, though, that any of the users and branches that are being protected by Global Protect Cloud Service are very easily able to take advantage of the new capabilities that come from the application framework because their logs are stored in the logging service. So let's continue our conversation on and talk about SaaS security. So whether you're trying to optimize the human resources process for a Fortune 500 company, or you're trying to manage the books for a local medical practice, or you're just trying to figure out the batting rotation for your local Little League team, there's a SaaS app that's for it, and there's probably a complementary mobile app that goes right along with it. So to avoid being overwhelmed by just the vast number of SaaS applications, we think it's important to try to categorize them. And so let me talk to you a little bit about what that means. Right, so the first kind of category that we think is important from a security perspective are sanctioned SaaS applications. These are the applications that you care about, you support, you pay for typically as an organization, and you want everyone to use them and use them very efficiently and comprehensively. It's usually the smallest aspect of SaaS. The second part of SaaS is the tolerated SaaS. So these are the applications where it's necessary for some segment of your business, but it needs to be very well controlled because not everybody needs to access it, and you don't want all the functions necessarily exposed. And there's a third aspect of SaaS, which is the unsanctioned, where if you had the ability, you'd never want anyone to touch these and never want anyone to get access to those applications. So in order to provide this capability around classifying and then protecting and providing granular controls, you need some kind of inline security capability to build this visibility and this policy enforcement. That's exactly what the next generation firewall does, and it's what Global Protect Cloud Service does. Right? It provides deep SaaS application visibility and policy control and enforcement. Now, specifically, one of the earliest technologies from Palo Alto Networks is App ID. Right? And the whole point of App ID was to create this visibility into the application usage and provide granular control. Today, we have over 650 SaaS applications that are identified by App ID, and many of them have additional functional controls that are identifiable and leverageable in policy. So things like uploading or downloading or remote control, all of those are identifiable elements that you can use in policy. And we've also made continuous enhancements to our Application Command Center, our ACC, and our SaaS visibility reports, all to make it easier to identify and manage SaaS usage. And as Lee mentioned recently in 8.1, we added the ability to do SaaS application characteristics. So we're now identifying risk characteristics for SaaS applications. So these can be certification levels, or have there been data breaches, or what are the terms of service or financial viability of that SaaS application. And we provide all of that data for you so that you can use that in policy and decide for yourself what constitutes a sanctioned, tolerated, or unsanctioned SaaS application. And last, as Lee mentioned, we added the ability to distinguish between the enterprise version of a SaaS application and its consumer counterpart. So as an example, yes to G Suite, no to Gmail. So specifically for the sanctioned SaaS applications, we have an additional opportunity to leverage API-based controls for both monitoring the in-cloud activity as well as protecting the data that's stored in those SaaS applications. This is what we do with Aperture. There are three main functions for this kind of service. The first one is data discovery and classification. So be able to scan large amounts of data, understand the data that's stored in the SaaS applications, and be able to classify it and know what kind of data it is, sensitivity-wise usually. Second part is to be able to prevent the data exposure. Sometimes that may be just alerting and making people aware of what kind of data is stored in the cloud and who has access to it. But it also increasingly means remediation, right? So if I sense that there's sensitive data or see sensitive data that's exposed, can I close that off very quickly and take automated actions against it? And then third, very importantly, to be able to protect against threats. So this is where we leverage the overall platform, and we take all the knowledge that we have with Wildfire, and we can apply it to our scanning efforts in the cloud and detect and remediate malware when we see it stored in cloud applications. So one challenge we haven't talked about yet is, what do you do about the sanctioned SaaS application users who are connecting to those applications from unmanaged devices? They're going to make their way directly to those applications, of course, and they're going to get the full benefit of in-cloud protections from Aperture. However, wouldn't it be great if you could take all of the inline capabilities we talked about before, all those granular application controls and preventative capabilities, and apply that to the same use case without blowing up the user experience? So let's take a look at how that might work with this demo. So the setup here is a user connecting to Office 365 from their home computer. So we'll see the user hit the normal Office 365 login screen where they're going to enter their username. That's going to redirect them to a single sign-on page, so the corporate single sign-on page. In this case, it's Okta. We'll see the user enter their credentials into the SSO page. And as you'd expect, once we sign in, we're going to get prompted for multi-factor authentication, because that would be a best practice if you're coming from a home computer and not your corporate-issued computer. So now once the user is logged in, we'll see the application specifically that the user wants to access is OneDrive. So we're going to access OneDrive, and as a peek into what's happening, notice that the SharePoint OneDrive URL is being prepended here. And more on this in a minute as far as exactly what's going on. Now from a function standpoint, the user now wants to preview a file and view it within OneDrive. And we see the preview for this revenue projection file. They're allowed to see it. It's exposed in the application fine. But when the user goes to download that file to their personal computer, we wind up on a block page, and we prevented that from happening. So that was pretty cool. Well, what exactly just happened, right? So let me walk you through the steps of what just went on. OK, so the unmanaged device connects to OneDrive. This is the normal workflow, right? And you go to your identity provider. Once you're authenticated, you have a direct path. You still get Aperture protections, but the inline's not there. What you just saw was a new SAML proxy cloud service from Palo Alto Networks inserted in the flow. And what that enables us to do is have the same seamless single sign-on experience, but then rewrite the URL to redirect the user to a Global Protect gateway to take advantage of the clientless VPN functionality that we have in Global Protect. And so now you have full inline capabilities as well as in-cloud capabilities for unmanaged devices. The SAML proxy service is part of the service for our Aperture customers. So if you're an Aperture customer, you have access to this today. You have to request it. And then we'll be adding on more broad exposure for this service in the future. So let me spend my last few minutes with you talking about public cloud. So we talked to a lot of customers about cloud, and absolutely, lift and shift is still continuing for a while. There are many organizations that are taking what they have in their existing environments, and they're just moving it into public cloud. That said, we see an increasing number of customers who are adopting a more cloud-native mindset for how they're approaching their cloud application development and their move to the cloud. This kind of means three things, right? So it means they're going to leverage cloud-native services. So there'll be a healthy mix of PaaS, or platform as a service, and serverless compute, along with the traditional infrastructure as a service workloads. It means customers are going to adopt a CI/CD mindset, or continuous integration, continuous deployment methodology for how they build, deploy, refactor, redeploy their applications. So a much faster process. And third, it means that almost by default, the mindset will be that the intention is, if not right away from the beginning, the applications are going to run in multiple cloud environments, or they have to be designed to run in multiple cloud environments. So when we think about security for public cloud infrastructure, there are 3 key touch points to consider. The first one is inline, so being in the path of traffic, ability to do full visibility, control, policy enforcement, and segmenting of workloads. This is what we do today with the VM series. Second area is on the host. So to the extent that infrastructure as a service is still being leveraged, and it is being leveraged heavily, when you look at the shared responsibility model, it's your responsibility in the public cloud when you're deploying those workloads to secure the underlying OS and to secure the workloads that are running on those virtual machines. And that's where Traps and its exploit prevention capabilities comes into play. And the third area is API-based security. So this is looking at the configurations and the permissions and the setup of the cloud infrastructure itself. And this is what we started to do in early days with Aperture, and most recently have now done with the acquisition of Evident.io. So by way of a little background on Evident as a service, it's a very quick deployment model because it's not in the path of traffic. So you don't need to reconfigure your application. You don't need to reconfigure your infrastructure. It's API-based. It ties in with the right permissions. And you get very quickly continuous and real-time visibility into a multi-cloud environment. And it's really built for the DevOps and SecOps and compliance communities. The data that comes out of the Evident service, the findings are very powerful and very actionable. So this is just an example. We analyzed about 2,500 cloud accounts, multi-cloud accounts, and we see trends like this. So 58% of deployments have unsecured VNets or VPCs with their default configurations in them. 55% of accounts use poor password policies, right? So totally against what they probably do within the enterprise, but in the cloud, someone else set that policy, and it rarely expires or doesn't expire for a long time, and ABC123 is OK with me, right? Very simple. Almost 50% don't use multi-factor authentication at all for their key IAM roles, and then a full third of them, for their most critical accounts, their root accounts, are using poor password policies, not using multi-factor authentication. So let's take a brief look at how Evident provides this kind of visibility and control in multi-cloud environments. So we'll start off with the EVID Dashboard, where you have a single view of multi-cloud risk and compliance rolled out across the top. When we zoom in, we can see how that breaks out by regions as well as by cloud platforms, in this case, Azure and AWS. If we roll further down, we can see the specific services that are running, like IAM and RDS, which is a database service, or ELB, load balancing services, and the risks broken out by that. We can view by teams or by group structures. So we want to see a different view for dev versus prod versus test, or look at it over time. And anything that we click will rebuild the views on the screen based on that filter that we just set. And what you'll see at the bottom of this is how your findings map against compliance standards like PCI and HIPAA and GDPR. And when you click into the report, you get a more detailed view specifically of how your cloud configuration is stacking up against the requirements from a particular regulation. So in summary, if you combine monitoring, compliance, and storage security, and you start wrapping around that both manual and then eventually automated remediations, you can trigger those via SNS or via Lambda or MindMeld or other third-party integrations. And eventually, we take all of this data and we move it into the logging service in the application framework, where it now becomes available for much deeper and much more rich analytics. We absolutely believe that Evident should be an essential part of any comprehensive public cloud strategy. So with that, I'll thank you for your time, and I'll turn it back to Lee.
Thank you, Adam.
Yep.
Awesome. So much cool stuff, huh? So if you're paying attention, we talked about network security, cloud security, endpoint security be next. There's a lot going on with Palo Alto Networks relative to endpoint security. And for that, I'd like to invite my second guest up on stage, Liat Hayun. Liat?
Hi, everyone. So today we're going to talk about endpoint security. But before we start talking about what we need to secure endpoints, let's first talk about what we need to secure endpoints from. So let's think about it from the attacker's perspective and think about why attackers need to leverage different techniques to compromise an endpoint. First, there was malware. And you probably remember the days where you get an executable as an attachment via email or a pop-up telling you to download an application, which is actually malware. For attackers, this is the most straightforward way to compromise an endpoint. But as users become more aware, as traditional security capabilities became better at preventing this, and as the operating systems became more sophisticated, this became less and less of the first attack vector that allows the attackers to compromise the endpoint, and more of a secondary tool that allows attackers to actually get their malicious intent to happen. And with that in mind, they had to turn to other mechanisms like fileless attacks. Fileless attacks is basically a fancy name for attackers being able to leverage existing mechanisms that you have in your operating system to be able to compromise the endpoints. Mechanisms like script engines, like macros within Office documents, and other tools that are usually built into the operating system. The more sophisticated capability for a fileless attack is exploit, as opposed to fileless attacks, where attackers use an application that was meant to be used in that way, but for malicious purposes. When attackers exploit an application, when they get an application to run their malicious code, it's usually not something that the application was intended to do. So think about applications like your PDF reader or your web browser. They can be exploited to run malicious code that attackers intended them to do. And the last capability that attackers leverage are stolen credentials. So instead of convincing you to run a malware or fooling you to run a script, which is actually a malware, they can actually steal your credentials and run the malware for you. So with this landscape in mind, let's think about what we need from an endpoint protection solution. We want a prevention-first approach that allows us to be able to protect against malware and ransomware, regardless of whether this malware is known or unknown, regardless if it's a commodity malware or a targeted malware that was specifically tailored for your organization. It needs to be able to protect against all of these. Similarly, it needs to be able to protect against exploits and fileless attacks. And again, this is regardless of whether the exploit is a known exploit in an unpatched system or a zero-day exploit that only attackers know about. And lastly, it needs to be able to protect against sophisticated attacks, where attackers leverage some of these mechanisms together and sometimes in an automated way. So for those of you who know traps, this is exactly what we do. From a malware prevention perspective, any file that, in this example, executed on the endpoint goes through several inspection mechanisms. First, it will be tested with Wildfire to see if the file was ever seen in any organization that we're protecting, and to be able to immediately prevent the execution of this file if it's a known threat. If it's unknown, the file will then go through a local capability that is based on machine learning, that again is based on the vast amount of data that we have from Wildfire, to be able to analyze this file and to identify if it's a suspicious file or not. If the file was allowed to execute, for example, if it's a legitimate application, the file will then go through behavioral analysis. So, for example, if it tries to enumerate over the file system and encrypts the files, then it will be prevented because it acts like a ransomware. It presents ransomware-like behavior, and it will be prevented. And lastly, the file, if unknown, the file will always be uploaded to Wildfire. That allows us to self-correct and to automate the mechanisms that we started this slide with. So it turns unknown files to known. It allows us to retrain our machine learning algorithms to make them better. And it actually also improves the rest of the platform and not only traps. So we have these different mechanisms in place, allowing us to provide coverage throughout different locations and to improve the accuracy of their overall solution. For exploit prevention, we do something that is very similar. We identify different steps that attackers need to take to get from a bug, from a vulnerability in an application, to an actual running exploit. There are certain techniques that they need to leverage, and our solution can identify these techniques and to prevent them from being leveraged by attackers. For example, we can identify legitimate applications and their context being used in a malicious way. And we've been doing this for a long time. So actually, this is what Traps started out with. And we're not going to go through each and every one of these techniques, but this is just to show you that exploit prevention is not a checkbox. You can't do exploit prevention the same way malware prevention was done previously. And to give you an example of this, let me tell you a small story. About 3 months ago, February this year, our researchers identified a new zero-day, a new exploit that targeted the Flash Player plugin. So any user using Flash Player to display Flash files within their browser was vulnerable to that type of exploit. Now, the interesting thing about this story is that that specific exploit, was used by attackers for over 2 months before it was ever identified by any security vendor. So there are 2 months where no security vendor knows about this exploit, and the software vendor can't release a patch because, again, they don't know about this exploit, and attackers have been using this exploit in the wild. Now, I would be happy enough to stand here and tell you that Traps could prevent this exploit from 6 months ago and to be able to prevent that attack. But in fact, the version of Traps that could prevent this exploit is actually 2 years old. So this is just to show you how future-proof this mechanism is, allowing us to prevent exploits even before attackers could even think about them. So you've seen how unique our approach to endpoint protection is. And I also want to highlight a few of the recent capabilities and recent changes we've done in the product. So with Traps 5.0, that was released about a few weeks ago, we've included a few very significant changes. First, Traps 5.0 can now be managed from the cloud. It can be managed using a cloud management service, basically a SaaS application that allows you to manage the endpoints in your organization. In addition to that, not only it's a SaaS application, the cloud management service for Traps is integrated by default to the application framework, basically leveraging the logging service as the database of the cloud management service. Second, we've completely redesigned the UI. We took all the experience and feedback that we got from our customers in the 6 years this product has existed, and we've changed the workflows to better support the use cases that are needed by you guys, by our administrators. And lastly, with Traps 5.0, we've also expanded our platform support to be able to protect Linux servers in addition to Windows and Mac. And just to show you how agile the cloud approach is, since 5.0, we've also introduced our support to Android devices, expanding to all 4 major operating systems used by enterprises. So what's next? What we've identified is that we want to maintain our prevention-first approach. We want to make sure that everything that can be prevented will be prevented, so any overhead that is included in identifying and detecting and responding to an event will be completely eliminated. But when we're able to also detect something very rapidly and to respond to it, we can provide an even better and more successful prevention. And this is how we're going to do this. We started this with the coordinated enforcement by leveraging Wildfire that is able to coordinate between endpoint, network, and cloud. We continued this by leveraging capabilities like Magnifier, our user behavioral analytics tool, on top of the application framework, identifying anomalies in all the information being fed into the logging service. And we're going to enhance this by integrating SecDo, the latest acquisition, into the application framework as well, allowing us to deliver a deeper visibility into what's going on in the endpoint and better insight to your flows within your organization, investigating alerts and identifying threats. So what we're basically going to do is very similar to what SecDo has been doing so far. First, we need to collect the right data. We need to collect the data relevant for our use cases. We need to collect it with a very high granularity, very high details. And we need to collect it without significantly impacting the user experience. We then use this data for two main flows. The first one is to be able to visualize activity chain and root causes within your organization, within endpoints in your organization. And this is not just for malicious flows. This is not just for attack chains. This is any activity chain within the organization that you would want to visualize. Second, we will expose this data for you to be able to proactively hunt for threats within that data. And this is how it's going to look like. So up until now, if you had an alert from the firewall alerting you on a blocked connection, this is basically what you would get. This is basically it. And you would have to go and find the endpoint, assuming it's somewhere in your part of the world, and to be able to investigate that endpoint and to understand what exactly happened. With these new capabilities, you'll be able to know exactly which process triggered that connection, created that connection, and triggered that alert. But that's not enough. What you would also get is context around that process, understanding what else happened. Is this process does this process exist on any other endpoint in your organization? What else did this process do before creating that connection? This context is valuable for you to be able to make a decision and to respond to that kind of alert. And that's not it. You will also be able to see exactly what was the root cause of this attack. In this case, a user opened a malicious email attachment, a malicious Excel document, that triggered PowerShell and later triggered the malicious process. So you'll be able to identify exactly how that attack, how that malicious process got into your organization. And again, we also want to be able to provide you the ability to proactively hunt for threats. So in this example, let's assume you also have users in your organization that opened this attachment, and that specific process did not communicate to its server yet. So you don't even get the alert. You'll be able to search for this process and identify exactly where in the organization it exists, and to see which other users opened the same email attachment that they got probably using the same attack vector. And lastly, you'll be able to also look for processes like PowerShell that is shown in this example to identify how these processes are being used in your organization. So what you would want to do next is to be able to prevent these types of attacks from ever happening. You'll be able to search for these patterns of usage within your organization and to be able to enforce a policy that will block any future occurrence of a similar attack, which is actually something that Traps already does by default. And how are we going to do all of this? Not surprisingly, using the application framework. So the second agent capabilities are all going to be integrated into Traps, making it a single agent that provides all the prevention capabilities we started with, as well as the data collection needed for the flows we've discussed. That data collection is going to collect all the relevant data into the logging service, and then we're going to leverage the experience and expertise that the Segru team has to create an app on top of the application framework that will provide the visibility needed for these flows. So we started this section by talking about the evolution of attacks. This is the next evolution of endpoint security. And with that, I'm going to switch it back to Lee. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Leah. Great job. Awesome. Got to give me some of that. All right. Cloud-delivered security services. This is obviously, if you've been listening this morning, this is obviously a big part of how we envision the future of analytics and security services being consumed. And as has become a tradition, I'd like to update you on one of the most successful cloud-delivered services we have, which is Wildfire. Wildfire is just a great example of taking what would otherwise be just a whole bunch of infrastructure that each and every one of you would individually have to go deploy and manage and operate, and transform that by making it a cloud-based service that you just consume. And this is a service that's grown over the last several years since it first came out, and even just the last several months, has expanded in some pretty meaningful ways. The file type support that you see here, the ability to deal with one of the newer obfuscation techniques with a new capability called dynamic unpacking. And then most recently, or actually quite soon, we're going to be adding this ability to do network profiling. So leveraging our data sciences team, machine learning, to be able to analyze the callback structure of malware and to be able to identify it and separate it out from what benign files do. A very cool additional capability is coming. Now, in addition to Wildfire just being a really great security service, one of the things that it provides is a lot of data. Now, this time last year at Ignite, I updated you on the amount of data that Wildfire had processed. And at that time, it was just over 3 billion unique files. And as is always the case, we're really excited about 3 billion, and we told you about it, and guess where we are today? As of this week, we've now processed well over 5 billion unique files through Wildfire. Every single one of these fully analyzed across the techniques that I just showed you. This is truly amazing from a scale and capacity perspective. And this produces a lot of additional data. It has produced well over 2 trillion artifacts. I can't even get my head wrapped around this notion of trillion, right? 2.3 trillion artifacts of information that we know exactly where they, what files they came from. We understand causality. We understand how they're related to each other. And because we understand that we don't have all the data, we built MindMeld, which is a threat syndication tool. And we now have over 4,400 instances of MindMeld running across many of your environments, allowing you to pull in threat intelligence from lots of other sources and combine it with what we have. And we have Unit 42, our threat intelligence team, that's constantly looking at this data and tagging it so that we understand who the adversaries are. We understand what campaigns are being launched. And probably most importantly, we understand when we see something new. New things are probably the most interesting, right? Unknowns, something to go investigate. And this becomes a very, very important contribution to the data that we have, in addition to what the logging service is able to collect from the network, from the endpoint, from the cloud. And so the set of data just continues to grow at ever-increasing rates. Now, why are we doing all of that? Well, we've talked about this before, this notion of the consumption model. How do we change the consumption model? Now, here's an example of actually a really amazing consumption model. But this is not the consumption model we need in security. We need to get past the consumption model where we take months and months and months to plan and evaluate lots of different choices. We need to get past the process where we ultimately have to just pick one because we know that it's going to take months, if not years, to get it deployed everywhere that it needs to be, and that we have to leave it deployed for 5 years while we depreciate it. Like, we have to get past that approach to the consumption of new security services. So this is why I built the application framework, right? So if we take what we do at the network level, we take what we do on the endpoint, we take what we do in the cloud, and we have to be really, really good at those things. Because like I said before, that's where security actually happens. But with the application framework, we make it possible for more and more of these security capabilities to simply be consumed. So let me give an example of this. So I'm guessing that many of you have thought about behavior analytics to some extent. Maybe some of you have even deployed it. But I'm going to guess that most of you haven't. Most of you are probably in the stage of like thinking about it, thinking it's important, thinking it's about something you would like to do, but probably looking at this going, it's a lot of stuff I have to roll out. It's a lot of new infrastructure that I'm going to have to manage and operate and keep updated. And hopefully you're looking at it thinking there's got to be a better way. And this is exactly what we were thinking over a year ago when we acquired Lifecycle, which was a really, really great behavior analytics company, that over a year ago, this is what you would have had to do to consume their capabilities. But as of just a few months ago, this is what you would have to do to consume their capabilities. Using Palo Alto Networks in the infrastructure, you would just need to activate the magnifier application. We took all of that extra infrastructure, we made it software in the next-gen firewall and the endpoint in the cloud, such that behavior analytics is simply consumed as an application. And one of the really cool things about this is that once it becomes an application that's consumed, we can rapidly innovate as well. So this first came out just a few months ago, yet we've already had the first iteration on functionality. Magnifier is already better than it was just a couple months ago. And it's going to keep getting better as we keep updating it, where we take on the operations, we take on the development, we take on this update process, and you just get the benefit of the improved capabilities. Now, when we built the application framework, we were obviously thinking about how it would enable us to deliver more applications faster, but we were also thinking about how it would enable us to enable third parties to build applications and deliver to you as well. And as of the beginning of April, so just a few weeks ago, we have stood up the first application framework that had all of the APIs and capabilities for third parties to develop on top of it. And we're sitting here thinking, how many apps are we going to get to be able to showcase at Ignite? Some of us thought 3, 5. Those of us who are particularly bold said, we think we're going to get in the double figures. At Ignite this week, there are over 30 working prototypes of third-party applications running on the application framework. It is awesome. And think about how short of a time frame that was that this happened. And I'm going to show you in a second the companies, but many of them have their demos running in the Innovation Sandbox. They have them running in their booth. They're going to showcase them in breakout sessions. But I want to take this opportunity to talk about a few with you today. And I thought it'd be interesting to start with an example around IoT. So IoT is, obviously IoT is not brand new, but IoT on the enterprise is a relatively new concept. It's probably one of those concepts where many of you are thinking, I should be doing something about this, but what? And you would probably start that really long process to try to find just the right one because you know you're going to have it for so long. We think we have a better way. So let me show you a couple of IoT applications built for the application framework. Let's play the first demo. So we're going to start here. This is the app portal where you can manage your applications. And we're going to go down and we're going to activate a new app. In this case, we're going to activate Medigate, which is a medical IoT application. And there's just a few fields you have to enter in order to activate this application, picking the region and things like that. And you agree. Now, there'll be one more step here. Scroll back up to the top. You have to actually give this application permission to access your data, of course. And then once activated, this application does some pretty cool stuff. By integrating with the application framework, it's able to detect, identify, and visualize a lot of information about medical devices on the network. Of course, it has the dashboard, but if we click on medical devices here, you'll see that by analyzing the traffic, integrating through application framework, it's able to inventory everything that's running. And as you drill down and filter, and we'll click on one of these devices, you can actually get a lot more information about that device, which is something that Medigate understands a lot of information about. That's what they're experts in. And because they integrate through the application framework, they understand how that application is actually behaving and working. And so what you see highlighted there is this is an infusion pump that for some reason has a medical imaging application communicating with it. That shouldn't happen. And we're able to combine that information together through Medigate's expertise plus all the visibility and knowledge that the application framework provides. Very cool example of an application that's being showcased this week. Let me show you a second one. So CyberX, also IoT focused, but in the ICS space. Similar dashboard in terms of getting broad visibility, but they automatically build this chart of all the different devices in the ICS space and how they're communicating. They allow you to drill into a specific device to better understand it, as well as to look at alerts if the device is doing something that wasn't expected. And in this case, this device was speaking with another device on an application that had never been seen before. Now you can drill into that in order to further understand the connection between these two devices. And in analyzing that connection, get a better understanding of whether or not this new communication was something that was supposed to happen or not. right? So we see the information about this device and what it's designed to do. And as we drill down, you now get to see across the entire infrastructure bandwidth utilization across different kinds of devices, different segments of the environment. You get to identify anomalies that are probably indicative of something strange happening. Might be new devices, but it might be malicious traffic. In a lot of ICS environments, Modbus is the application of choice, and so being able to understand how that is being used. But then interestingly, through the integration with the application framework, also understand any other applications that are running in that environment as well, that also might be indicative of something behaving the way that it's not supposed to. Very cool examples in the IoT space. Now, I want to give one more example for you. And this one's going to have a little more moving parts. Let's think about SecOps and what typically happens when you get an alert. And this example I'm going to give, imagine a user tried to download a piece of malware and was blocked. You might still want to understand, was that user's machine compromised? Was anyone else potentially infected? What else was going on? Now, traditionally in the SecOps world, this would be a very manual process and would take a lot of time and energy. So let's take a look at what that might look like in the future with the application framework. Leveraging 3 different applications. Centrify from an identity perspective, identifying that host was potentially compromised, and immediately elevating the risk profile to force multi-factor authentication to verify that that is really a true user on the machine and not a malicious actor. At the same time, automatically initiating incident response with ServiceNow, with a lot of the data already pre-populated, pulled directly out of the application framework without the user having to go enter it all in, being able to expose the threat lookup results, as well as the ability to drill down on those results and even integrate with another application, in this case Recorded Future, that has already captured a tremendous amount of information about this incident, combining what they know, plus, through integration with the application framework, pulling information that Palo Alto Networks already knows as well. So now you have just a tremendous amount of information consolidated in one place to aid with the response. Now, one of the big questions is, was anyone else infected? So now we go back and we take a look. We run the query, again, against the application framework to say, did we see this anywhere else? Did we see anyone else connect to this malware distribution site? And in fact, there are 2 other users that had done that. So now let's take action. Let's make sure that nobody else in the environment can get to this malware distribution site. And it's as easy as updating an EDL that then gets pulled down from every next-gen firewall in that environment. So you see, many of the steps that used to be just a tremendous amount of time and energy get replaced by automated actions from just a few applications leveraging the application framework. Very cool. So I mentioned 30 plus. First and foremost, I want to give a very, very, very big thank you to some of our design partners. Phantom, now part of Splunk, ProtectWise, and Recorded Future. These 3 companies have been with us through this entire journey, and they've been a tremendous help to us. And I want to thank the 3 of them for everything they've contributed to making this a reality. We have a number of cloud partners that we've worked with to build applications in the application framework. ICS, IoT, and even an NAC vendor that have found ways to integrate with the application framework to build very compelling applications. MSSPs that have looked at this and said, what a fantastic opportunity to enhance and provide better services to our customers. And it's probably not a surprise, a bunch of analytics vendors coming up with some really great ideas for how they can leverage this data to provide even better services to all of you. Identity vendors, I showed the Centrify example. They've found a way to leverage this data in order to make identity a more integral component of security. Security operations, finding ways to automate more and more of the SecOps workflows to make all of your lives easier and actually allow you to spend more time on higher value tasks that require humans to be involved. Threat intelligence integrations. This is a category I expect we'll see tens, if not hundreds, of integrations in the future. And during a couple of late nights, we even have some really crazy ideas. We actually have an Alexa integration. I'm not sure where that one's going to go. The Slack integration I get. But some really, really just cool and amazing things have been accomplished in just a very short period of time. And so we're very excited to be able to showcase all of this for you during the expo this week. So with that, I want to leave you with just a few thoughts. Back to the original message. Our goal, our mission is to prevent successful cyber attacks. And we're very focused on that. We're very focused on building a new approach that helps make sure that all of you can focus on what really matters. And a big part of that, of course, is changing this consumption model of how you consume new security innovation, both from us as well as other third parties. And doing all of this in a way that is built for automation, that really leverages this notion of automation playing a bigger and bigger role in everything we do from a security perspective. All right? Now, with that, there's one more speaker that will be coming up next, Mark Anderson, with a video that will play just before that. Thank you all very, very much.
I'm going to record a future.
I'm a swim lane.
And we're really excited about cyber.
I'm building an app for the Palo Alto Networks application framework.
We're real excited about this integration. And
we're glad to get this opportunity to make the user experience better.
So it makes total sense to integrate with Palo Alto Networks.
This is going to enable our security analysts to much more rapidly fully investigate and remediate any kind of security detection that they find in their platform.
This is the team of brilliant minds redefining the security of medical Internet of Things.
Cheers! We're SecBI!
We are on to it!
We are the zone!
Cybersecurity, as you know it, is finished. Endless innovation is here. Now available from anyone, anywhere, instantly. We've reinvented security again, and it runs on the world's only security operating platform. The age of cobbled-together security is done. Reinventing your infrastructure over and over is over. You can now deploy frictionless, seamlessly integrated security delivered from the cloud as apps. Unlimited plug-and-play protection. Drag-and-drop innovation. App developers everywhere have instant access to tens of thousands of organizations and over a decade of aggregated threat data and telemetry. We've reshaped the future of security, and it's here today. The application framework from Palo Alto Networks.